Walter Jehne. I practiced getting his surname right. He's a retired soil microbiologist and much more. He's now involved with Regenerate Earth and works with innovative farmers in Australia and globally to refine natural solutions to our soils, hydrology, climate, food, and ecological imperatives in support of a regenerated Earth. Thank you, Walter. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, look, thank you very much, everybody, for coming and having me and listening. Like the other speakers, I would very much like to, again, acknowledge country, the original owners of this country, but much, much more importantly, the actual stewardship and knowledge and wisdom that they learned. As a soil microbiologist, microbial ecologist, we go back a long way, 3.8 billion years. Actually, the first life, the first microbe that formed, the processes that microbe used to actually create life. But then 420 million years ago, when basically life evolved on land. Up to that, of course, it was in the oceans, but the fungi growing from the estuarine edges onto the land to solubilize rock, to access nutrient. And in that fundamental process of pedogenesis, soil formation that Penny talked about, creating organic detritus, which mixed with mineral detritus forms soil. And in a sense, that's the foundation crucible for life on land. And of course, the next important point is that 46 million years ago, when Australia left Gondwana land and slowly drifted north, the driest inhabited continent, the most stable surface land mat, the most weathered soils, very, very low nutrients, but 46 million years of biological microbial evolution to generate unique biosystems for solubilizing nutrient, capturing water, building productivity, and actually building then that wonderful rich habitat that 60,000 years plus our first Indigenous people basically learn to steward, manage, and take forward. So very, very foundational events in our history. We've only been here for 230 years. And of course, as Charles has said, we've had some significant consequences on that area. But the real message now is basically by 2030, we have to fundamentally change things because perhaps we have 10 years left. Otherwise, we're going to hit thresholds, or we're already passing the thresholds. We've talked about those, but it's actually a little bit more serious than that. It all brings us back to the fundamental thing, and I remember Ian Lowe talking about this 40 years ago, Commission of the Future. I was looking, I'm a soil scientist, I was in CSIRO for a long time, but then I joined Barry Jones, John Button, Innovation Strategies, Innovation Development. Commission of the Future was one of my gigs. And basically, yeah, that whole message that, look, everything depends on ecology. It's the ecology of the biosystems that we have that are the foundations of, our lives, our future, our everything, strategic security. It's that ecology, and the economy is simply a small subset of that ecology. We stuff the ecology, we actually crash economies. And that's a lesson that we really need to come back to. Here are the fundamental ecological laws, principles, soils, vegetation, water, climate, and we have to really respect, understand, and regenerate those systems. Okay, so that ecology is really important, which really now brings us to farming, because this is, of course, a conference about where to agriculture, whither Australia's agriculture, I sort of call my talk. Where's it going? What are the consequences? And of course, these crises that we're facing, we've already raised them, are fundamentally going to impact agriculture. But there's another side to that equation. You see, because not only are farmers, agriculture going to be impacted, but whether you like it or not, farmers are the only point of agency we have to make the changes we need to do. So yes, farming has impacted 13.7 billion hectares of land on this planet. Basically, we've created 5 billion hectares of man-made desert and wasteland, over about 40% of it. Farming, 8,000 years. But the point is, it's farming that is really the only basis of agency of change. And so really the critical thing is innovation. Where are the innovations? How do we foster, document the scientific rigor of them, demonstrate them, extend them, and go forward? And coming back to Penny's point, that's again very important, because that's where in 2008, Michael Jeffrey was just retiring from being Governor General, and he, in a sense, approached us and sort of said, can we come and join him in looking at this whole land regeneration, soil regeneration agenda? At that stage, I'd retired, and we'd formed a little group called Healthy Soils Australia. Very, very innovative farmers around Australia. These are the outstanding outliers, they were called by Cyril. But these are the outstanding outliers, like Ian and Di Haggerty, doing 10 tons of carbon per hectare per annum sustainably in minimal input systems, sustainably growing crops 4 years out of 5 rather than the 2 years out of 5 that the conventional farmers were experiencing as climate extremes and vulnerabilities intensified. So these were the innovators. And with Michael then, we actually documented these case studies. So when basically in 2012 we launched this report, these are really leading global innovations. Then basically, yes, the soils advocacy role and the soil role was then recognized by our Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, at the time. And of course, we've heard the history. But it's really that innovation. So that innovation comes both to the 46 million years of Australia's unique evolution, our First Nations stewardship and wisdom and learning of how to manage this land, manage fire, manage hydrology, manage resilience, manage nomadism, and really survive very, very well on this land. And then how do we actually heal the land, regenerate the land to take it forward using the practices? And again, Charles has outlined a lot of those with its holistic management, grazing ecologies, whether it's integrated cropping, pasture cropping, agroforestry. Another particularly critical thing that we got very much involved with is the issue of urban agriculture. Comes to Chris's point, yes, we're going to have 10 billion people on this planet by 2050. It's more or less locked in. 70% of those people will be living in concentration camps we call cities. All of them will be completely dependent and vulnerable on the water, the food that they can get. So urban agriculture, the capacity of urban communities to take the nutrients that they currently are putting out as pollution that threatens their health, pandemics, etc. How do we turn that nutrient capital back into healthy food, healthy people? So urban agriculture is, again, a massive frontier in this agenda. It's critical, of course, coming back to Chris's point, we're going to have these 7 billion plus people living in these cities. Most will be under 30 youth. So where are the jobs? Where's the enterprise? Where's the opportunities? How do we create that in cyclic economies, food production, urban agriculture? Because we had the lesson from the Arab Spring, there are only 7 missed meals between social stability and chaos. Okay, 7 missed meals. And so really this whole food security, innovation, agriculture, both broadacre and urban, is really the critical game in town. The game's getting harder, and we talk about climate change because we've talked about the thresholds, including climate change. They're all real, but actually they're much worse. In 2005, Joachim Schellenhuber organised a major conference in the Hadley Centre, England, And it was all about dangerous hydrological climate extremes. So yes, of course, CO2 is going up and it will continue to go up. Charles Keeling showed us that in 1958. Yes, it's real, but that's not the real crisis. It's these dangerous hydrological climate extremes, the hurricanes, the floods, the storms, the droughts, the aridification, the wildfires, because these are the things that are now collapsing biosystems. Okay, so they hit a threshold and that biosystem collapses. And with that, the communities collapse. And this is, in a sense, where we've conned ourselves with politics. We say, yes, we're kicking the can down the road. We'll get scientists to look at 2,100 scenarios and sort of just say, well, look, yes, externalize, externalize, externalize. Okay, because it's all just avoiding reality, avoiding responsibility. And it's these hydrological extremes that are happening and intensifying, accelerating now. We have 10 years to address them. Okay, and so this is, in a sense, again, where what we're talking about, agriculture, regeneration, becomes critical. Pretty gloomy stuff, but really what I wanted to say and why I introduced it this way is, hey guys, there is a solution. We have a beautiful, natural, safe, elegant solution. Nature's given it to us. It's how nature created the biosystems. It's how we can regenerate those biosystems and with that, our stability in future. It all comes down to one simple thing. Charles talked about it. We can elaborate on it. It's regenerating the Earth's soil carbon sponge. So there's one thing, this conference, one headline, regenerate the Earth's soil carbon sponge. Every square meter, every backyard, every acre, every catchment, every nation. And the point is, yes, we can. It's practical. It's as simple as doing what farmers do exceptionally well. Charles mentioned it again, maximizing green, maximizing photosynthesis. We have free sunshine, free CO2. We can even get a price for that. We can get paid for it. Free water in the air, and of course, plant genotypes. And they can actually draw down, fix that CO2, turn it into sugars and biomass. And of course, farmers have been excelling at that for the last 8,000 years. But what, in a sense, we have to do next is the most important thing, because it's not how much biomass we grow. It is not yield maximization alone. It is what happens to every gram of biomass that we fix. And all through the last, 3.5 billion years since blue-green algae evolved, only two things have been able to happen to that biomass. Two things. It can either oxidize back to CO2 rapidly through fire or slowly through respiration, or it can get sequestered into stable soil carbon, the humates, the glomalins that then, of course, make our coal and fossil fuels and soils. So we have control, we have agency over those three processes: the fixation of carbon, the rate of its oxidation, and of course, most importantly, the sequestration of that carbon into soil. And of course, to do that, we have to come back to our fungi, our friendly fungi. It's non-sexist. They're going to have fungi, fungals, and funguses. So everybody can get involved. Okay? So that's the whole point. It's changing that whole balance between oxidation and biosequestration, changing the ratio between fire and fungi, whether it's in our forest wildfire management, whether it's in our agriculture, we are in charge. We have agency. Okay? And so it's building the microbial ecology to optimize biosequestration. So at least 70% of that carbon that's fixed by plants is sequestered to build soils. And our innovators, Gabe Browns and all those colleagues, Dave Johnson, et cetera, around the world, yep, they're doing it. fixing, in many cases, more than 10 tons carbon per hectare per annum. But it's not the numbers, it's just the fact, just do it. Just do it everywhere. And that's, in a sense, the powerful message. Since, of course, leaving Soils for Life and Michael's agenda, we've been actually looking at Regenerate Earth, or we formed a bigger NGO globally, Regenerate Earth, because basically we've had now requests and people are doing it. We work in Andhra Pradesh in India with Vijay Kumar, and then straight up to Modi. Over 1 million poor women farmers, less than 1 acre of land, often leased land, tripling their yields in zero budget natural farming, pre-monsoon dry seeding, getting 3 times the yield with 10% of the inputs, meeting their nutritional integrity requirements, their preventative health requirements. And Modi has now taken that forward as it's India's national strategy, not for just water, not just for food, but for climate and the whole future resilience. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, United Nations, we're doing this with FAO, basically has picked that up and 2 years ago and said, look, here are these natural climate solutions, powerful things. Why? How? It's really quite easy. It's a bit like nature. If we can regenerate the soil carbon sponge, we actually generate enormous positive feedback loops. The key one, of course, is in hydrology, okay, because it is a sponge that allows us to infiltrate water, retain water in our in-soil reservoirs, that 2-3 meter layer of soil, healthy soil over biosystems, healthy biosystems, holding more water. I mean, we've done the equation for Northern Australia. I think, Chris, you were part of that Northern Australian conference. We can give you 100 lake argyles, extra lake argyles across Northern Australia, where you need it, when you need it, protected from evaporation for no cost. And today, Barnaby announced $500 million for a new dam in central Queensland. Okay, so these are the issues, but of course, don't worry about Barnaby, just do it. Just forget about the politicians. They're not going to solve this. Just do it, grassroots, because every farmer is building that. And that's, in a sense, the Haggerty's, 6 inches of rainfall, sustainably growing 3 tons of very high quality grain on those bastard sands. That's what they call them. But the point is, because they've got the sponge, they've got that water retention, they've got that productivity, they've got that resilience. We talked about India, again, US Defense Department. The US Defense Department in their strategic analysis have recognized that these climate biosystem collapse extremes are the critical thing. No amount of hardware is going to avoid that if we get too many Syrians around the world, right? 4 million refugees hiking north. Okay, so the question is, what is it we have to do? And it's build resilience in our biosystems pronto. Biden's put $200 billion into that agenda. So now where are the action agendas on the ground to do it? And that's the critical thing now. It's the action on the ground to drive this regeneration initiative everywhere. And this is, again, where farmers are actually in the leading role. The problem is, in a sense, is politics, because, we've spent 50 years talking. When I was a young scientist, we had the Earth Summit in Stockholm, 1972. You'd all remember that. Limits of growth, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, Charles Keeling, CO2 increasing. You go back further, Alexander von Humboldt, so 200 years ago. So the warnings, the messages have been there, but we've just talked and more talked. Bullshit's good for soils, it sort of makes things grow. But basically, we've got to go beyond that, right? Okay, and so it's really empowering grassroots farmers. And this is then where it comes back to the sort of work that Charles is doing. Cry of the Reed Warbler. Here are innovative farmers all over the place forming local groups, making these changes, whether it's in grazing management, innovative cropping, agroforestry, but particularly this whole urban agriculture revolution in use. They're critically important. There's also on another front, we've just come out of 2 years of pandemics. And of course, we've had to delay this conference because of that. But we have no idea just how vulnerable we are. Okay, since the Second World War, the nutritional integrity of our food has been compromised by over 70%. Our food now may contain less than a third of the essential nutrients and often none of the essential 40 trace elements we need for our biochemistry and preventative health. Why? Because we're effectively growing food hydroponically, NPK, fertilizers, biocides, etc., and we're not getting the nutritional integrity. Linus Pauling, way back in the 50s, Nobel Prizes, basically 90% of the preventative health, the biochemistry of animals, humans, is related to the nutrition of the food they get. We've compromised that. We've become extremely vulnerable, subclinically malnourished. There's 8 billion of us, at least 5 billion of us would be vulnerable. And of course, that's, as Charles said, directly associated with that exponential rise in these diet-related diseases, whether it's cancer, cardiac, et cetera, et cetera. We've got a $15 trillion industrial food system. And of course, our farmers at the moment are getting 8 cents in the dollar growing commodities feeding into that. But basically that $15 trillion industrial food system is generating a $20 trillion plus industrial disease industry. And that's going to get people just as quickly as climate change. Okay, major challenges, but really it's only grassroots action farming that can help it. And just to come into some good news is, yes, we can. And in a sense, it's by rebuilding the sponge, having water available, that just as in nature, we can naturally and safely cool the climate. Now, this is a radical proposition. I talked about in Harvard 8 years ago, but actually it's picked up a bit of steam. You see, because 95% of the heat dynamics of the blue planet is driven by water, by hydrological process. The CO2 component of the greenhouse effect does 3.8%. We can argue out decimal points, 3.8% compared to 95. So it's through hydrology that we can get transpiration. That takes 24% of the incident solar heat energy Earth receives back up into the upper atmosphere, largely out to space. Cloud formation, 33% of solar energy reflected back out to space before it even gets to the planet. Basically, rainfall nucleation, Charles showed us the slides of the rabbit-proof fence, cloud nucleation. Again, this is our rainfall. With the rainfall, we can reopen nighttime radiation windows. There's another 60 watts per square meter, or another 20% of incident solar radiation we can lose there. But the biggest thing is this thing that we've developed now with Bijay Kumar in India, pre-monsoon dry seeding, because we're looking to regreen, rehydrate 1 billion hectares of those arid wastelands. And if we can do that, if we can put 365-day green cover on those rangelands, then we can keep those temperatures on that soil much lower, under 20 degrees centigrade. By comparison, the brown, dead, exposed soil will even often heat up to 60, 70 degrees centigrade. We can't walk on it. Just a second. Right. And of course, we know physics is clear that basically the amount of re-radiation going up from the Earth is governed by the temperature of the Earth. Stefan-Boltzmann equation, the fourth power of the temperature in degrees Kelvin. So we can turn down the greenhouse effect, not by changing the gas concentration, the CO2 gas component, but by actually reducing significantly the amount of heat re-radiated by regenerating those surfaces. But to do that, we need water. And to do that, have that water, we need to regenerate the soil carbon sponge. So thank you very much. And please, any questions? I know some of this is controversial, not really. Nature's done it, for 420 million years, but it's about time we get onto it. Otherwise, we just end up as one of those civilizations, the 23 civilizations that we look for in the dust of archaeology, as Jared Diamond showed us. Thank you.
Thanks.